Sentence structure is one of those things that can either make or break your writing. When you do your first draft of your writing, you usually get all your ideas down on paper. That's one of the hardest parts of writing, is to get all your ideas down and make sure all your ideas are good. But the second step of writing is actually just as hard. You have to edit all those great ideas, so not just that they're good ideas, that they sound good. One of the most important things when you edit is looking at the sentence structure. If all of your sentences have the same structure, it gets pretty boring after a while. In this video, I'm going to introduce to you different ways to structure sentences. Now, I don't have to go around and restructure every single sentence, but it's something that I definitely want you to start paying attention to. Sentences are structured in multiple ways. When we look at the structure, we look at where the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives are all placed. We also look at how many clauses are in one sentence, how long the sentence is, how short it is, things like that. When we start structuring sentences, the noun usually goes first. When you started writing in kindergarten, you had a very simple structure, and it was usually noun first, then verb. Your sentences would sound like this. I like cars. I like dolls. I like my mom. I like teachers. The noun goes first. As your writing became more advanced, your vocabulary got more advanced, but sometimes your structure stayed the same, with the noun going first. Cars drive on streets and freeways. People drive in cars. It's kind of switched around a little bit. The words are better, but it's still the noun first, then the verb. You can easily change the structure of those sentences just by having the verb go first. Instead of saying, I like cars, you can say, liking cars is what I've been doing since I was 4 years old. Instead of saying, people drive cars, you can put the verb first and say, driving cars is fun. Sometimes, if you're really snazzy, you can have the adjective go first. Just a quick little switch of which word goes where, and now you've changed the structure. When you put the adjective first, that gets a little tricky. You could say something like, red cars are my favorite, or fast cars are my favorite. Or you could even start with two adjectives and say, red fast cars are my favorite. You could start with an adjective like dangerous and then restructure your whole sentence around the word dangerous. Dangerous car accidents can happen if you're not careful. Before I really get into how to switch that around, let me review those nouns and verbs and adjectives. A noun is a person, a place, or a thing. Now, sometimes you can get kind of confused about what that means, like what's a thing? Is happiness a thing? Is a sunset a thing or a time, right? Sometimes it gets a little confusing. So here's a good thing that I always do to remember it. If you can put the word the in front of it, it's probably a noun. The sunset, the dog, the police officer, the city, the car accident. All of those are nouns. Now a verb is an action word, but a passive verb is something that just is, like has or was or is. Those are all passive verbs. So if I wrote the sunset is, the dog ran, the police officer called, the city hummed, the car accident was. All those words in yellow are verbs. An adjective, on the other hand, describes something, such as the lovely sunset, the mean dog, the Asian police officer, the ancient city, the awful car accident. All of those are adjectives. You've probably been working with nouns, verbs, and adjectives since you were in kindergarten. So let's go back to the structure again. If the noun goes first, I like cars, cars drive on streets and freeways, people drive cars, there's nothing wrong with the noun going first. That's fine. Just don't do it all the time. When the verb goes first, it gets a little tricky. When the adjective goes first, it gets really tricky. You have to really have command of the English language to manipulate things around like that. So let's look at my example. I want you to reread one of the draft of my writing about the police officer and the car accident before we get started. So read this silently to yourself. Let me take a closer look at my first paragraph. And this is what you're going to do in your writing. You're going to look closely at one paragraph. I'm just going to look at how I started the sentence. My first sentence starts with, it was. My next sentence starts with, the police officer was. The day was. She thought she would. Oh, finally I didn't say was. The phone rang. She knew. The person said. In all of these instances, I have a noun and a verb. In the case of the first paragraph, I have a noun and a was and a noun and a was. All of them are noun verb pretty much, and I use the same structure in my first paragraph. How boring was that? Let me show you how I can switch that around. So here I have my narrative written and spaced out enough for me to edit some things. On my first sentence, I'm just going to take out that first sentence and I'm going to restructure it. Instead of saying it was almost the end of her shift, I'm going to say the end of her shift was near. And then I'm going to take out this sentence here too. The day was rather uneventful, and I'm just going to take that whole thing and switch around the clauses, and then I'm going to say her day was rather uneventful, just 2 calls. And then I'm going to take out the rest of that. I know I'm still using the word was a bunch, but I've restructured it a little, so it's a little better. So she's going to say, I'm almost out of here, she thought. Let me read it again to make sure it sounds good now. The end of her shift was near. The police officer was just about ready to go home for the day. Her day was rather uneventful, just 2 calls. I'm almost out of here, she thought. I'm going to get rid of that sentence, and I'm going to change it to a sound. Ring, ring. And then I'm going to throw in some dialogue again. 911, what's your emergency? She asked. I think that changes up the structure a little bit better. So let's review that real quick. Sentences are structured in multiple ways. When we look at the structure, we look at where the nouns, verbs, and adjectives are all placed. We look at how many clauses are in one sentence. I want you to look at the conclusion to my story. Read the end of my story silently to yourself. Now I'm going to look at how to change the structure of these sentences. Let me take a look at the structure I've used so far. Here's my first sentence. That's a long sentence. I didn't realize I started off with such a long sentence. So let me do some editing. If I look at this last sentence here, it's short, but my first sentence is long. I mean, that's changing structure, but let me re-edit it. Okay. First thing I do when I edit is I'm going to give myself some space to work. And I kind of want to get rid of this part and this part. I want to make it little sentences. Would this sound better? She saved a life tonight. She was a hero to an entire family. However, to her own son, she was just mom. Does that sound like a better beginning? Let me read it again, make sure it sounds good. She saved a life tonight. She was a hero to an entire family. However, to her own son, she was just mom. And that's better. Maybe one day she would tell little Alejandro that his mother was a hero, or maybe one day he would figure it out for himself. That sentence seems kind of long. I'm going to get rid of the or, add a period, and a capital M. Now it's different sentences. Okay, let me read this all together and see if it sounds good. She saved a life tonight. She was a hero to an entire family. However, to her own son, she was just a mom. Maybe one day she would tell little Alejandro that his mother was a hero. Maybe one day he would figure it out for himself. As soon as the thought came into her mind, he came out of the bedroom, video game in hand. Mijo, her heart smiled when she saw him. How was your day? That's better, isn't it? That's better. So I had to restructure it to make it sound better, and I restructured the sentences by moving things around. You can have some short sentences and some long sentences in the same paragraph. That's perfect. You can have some sentences that are imperatives. That's great, like a command. Go outside, change a sentence, read your book. Or you can have a question. How many questions do you have in your writing right now? Adding a question is a great way to mix it up. And pay very close attention to your noun-verb pattern. Don't always have the noun first. Kind of mix it up. So your task for today is kind of tough. I need you to look at the narrative you already wrote. I want you to reread what you already wrote and then make some changes. But I want you to look closely at one paragraph. I want you to think, could you add a question here? I want you to try to add an imperative sentence. I want you to exclaim something, just in one paragraph. Okay, now look at another paragraph. Maybe in another paragraph you could make some sound effects. Maybe you could change the structure by moving things like I did. Maybe you could add dialogue. Overall, I just want you to make sure that some sentences are long and some sentences are short, and there's a variety to the sentences. So maybe you can't do all 7 of these things. Maybe you could just do 3 of them. Today's task is to look at a narrative you wrote and look at the structure and try to format it so you have some sentence variety. That's it for the day, and I know your writing is getting better and better.